I'm not hearing anything.
Well, hello there, and welcome to the Second Life Book Club. My name is Draxtor Dupre. Welcome to Book Club Island, where we meet every Wednesday with readers, writers, publishers, editors, people who cherish the written word. Sometimes they cherish the F word, but let's not get into this. We discuss writing and reading here, and we also welcome elapsed readers. I forgot to say this last time. We welcome elapsed readers. So if your last read novel was assigned to you back in high school, come on in. We'll find a book for you. Um, does this sound too much like a cult? Anyways, today's guest is another fabulous one. We will get right to him after a few house cleaning notes. So here at the book club, we have a group, of course. Please do join. You can suggest a show idea by sending me an email or an IM. You can click on the board behind me that shoots you to the website and the calendar. We're booked solid through March 2021, and I'm actively obsessing over booking 1 year in advance. So please do hit me with suggestions of authors that you like. We have a reading list on bookshop.org. Go to bookshop.org and look for Draxtor Reads. They're not sponsoring us yet. They deliver in the US and Canada only, but they're expanding. Their business model is well, I guess they position themselves as a sort of the anti Amazon uh, in the sense that they support local shops and operations. And since we're listed in the destination guide here in Second Life under featured events, you may bump into a well-meaning noob stumbling around. So if you're a seasoned Second Lifer, please help them out. Don't dismiss them, befriend them, recommend some books. I would like to thank our team. Strawberry Linden is in charge of camera and streaming and censorship. I'm just joking.
Yeah.
Brett Linden, who helps out with security and marketing. Patch Linden, the whole governance team, including the molds. Marianne McCann customized the venue. Kralos dresses up the avatars. And of course, big thanks to Silas Merlin, who makes special swag and custom avatars. We got brand new coffee mugs by AJ McDowell. They're here on the table. You click one, and they will give you a coffee cup. We have a new partnership with Slink, slinkstyle.com, makers of fine Second Life skins. And today we'll introduce a awesome game area outside of the venue put together by our own Arduin Schwartzman. So today's guest is science fiction author Peter Watts, and the bio blurb on his website rifters.com is so good that I'm just going to read it off the page uh, in an excerpt. Peter Watts is an awkward hybrid of biologist, science fiction author, and, according to the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, a convicted felon slash terrorist. In addition to a number of accolades for science fiction, he has won minor awards in fields as diverse as marine mammal research and video documentary. His book Blindside, a philosophical rumination on the nature of consciousness with an unhealthy focus on space vampires. Now, I know that people who have been asleep here at the book club, they're waking up now. Vampires, what? I'm going to read that. The book Blindside has become a core text in diverse undergraduate courses ranging from philosophy to neuropsychology. Watt's work is available in 20 languages, described by the Globe and Mail as one of the very best hard SF writers alive. And critic James Nichols said, whenever I find my will to live becoming too strong, I read Peter Watts. Well, welcome, Peter, aka Squidnapper. How is your will to live today?
It's it was fine until I realized that I wasn't allowed to use profanity here. Um, I mean, one of the more minor negative effects is that my selected reading excerpt is going to go down to about 45 seconds.
We had the same issue last last week with Matt Ruff. Don't worry about it. We like freedom of expression here in Second Life, but unfortunately, as we use additional third-party platforms who sometimes restrict that and don't see it the same way, we have to be careful. But let's not overthink it. Behind you is actually on the screen. I see it now. I don't know if you see this. You can turn around or use your mouse camera. Behind you is a quote that I love. It says, "If believing absurd falsehoods increase the odds of getting laid or avoiding predators, your brain will believe those falsehoods with all its metaphorical little heart. This is, in fact, your quote. I don't know what that has to do with profanity, but I still like it.
Well, I suppose you may have changed out metaphorical for something that had F in it. I'm not sure. But yeah, no, it's a.
When did you come up with this? Or in what
Well, I mean,
context?
it's hard to say. I mean, it's not a particularly radical sentiment, right? My formal
No.
background is in biology, and so I've basically spent my entire adult education and career internalizing the fact that we were shaped by the same brute forces of natural selection that shaped everything else on the planet, and as a result, our behavior still reflects those legacy circuits to a very large extent. We do a lot of things that taken at face value don't make a lot of sense in this environment. And it's been my experience that every time you look at an absurd behavior by a human being and sort of port it back a few thousand or a few million years, because a lot of these behaviors are actually not just limited to humans, but I mean, we behave pretty much the same way as sticklebacks and buffalo in a lot of different ways. You find that a lot of our, let's be polite and call them idiosyncrasies, make a lot more sense when you just look at us as animals who, although we have very big brains, tend to use our brains more to make excuses for our instincts than to control them. And so that's just kind of a truism, right? Our brains were shaped to survive, to promote our fitness, and our brains were never really designed to seek out truth. That's why the charismatic person tends to win the debates, not the person with the facts on their side.
And despite this, what you call truism, and I mean, this is obviously more timely than ever, despite this, and despite every intelligent person being aware of this, it's in some fashion, we still feel that we can convince people with true facts or with facts that are provable and can convince them otherwise. I was just talking with Arduin earlier before the show, who put up this wonderful board at the game area outside about this quote. He actually found this quote of yours, and we were talking about this in the context of QAnon and other current phenomena. But before we'll get into how sci-fi and all this also connects to the real world, because I do want to talk with you about if you feel that sci-fi writers actually have some sort of, I don't know, moral responsibility to weave in a prescription for a societal or political organization, or if sci-fi can just also be just complete sort of space opera without any pretense to discuss deeper issues other than killing the aliens. I mean, you can actually, if you want to say how you stand on that, let's get into this right now. What is the role of a sci-fi writer?
Well, I think it's a big tent. I don't think any of the things that you've mentioned are excluded. I'm certainly not going to
But I
sneer
want
at
to have
somebody
you
who
guys
just
to
writes things
change the world, Peter. Sorry
Yeah,
to
but
step on
well,
you.
in the first place, I would actually I run shrieking from the phrase moral responsibility.
Mhm.
I don't like morals very much. Morality is a gut level response. It's kind of trust your feelings, Luke. Forget about rationality. And it frequently, I mean, again, it's a classic case of something that society has kind of elevated, when in fact it's just basic self-serving. For example, you have two kids, and two of your children are burning in the house, and four of somebody else's children are burning in the same house. The moral person rescues their own kid because it's mother love, it's kin selection. The ethical person acts in the greater good and rescues the stranger's children because there's more of them. Given that, what do you think? And there, in fact, are types of brain damage out there. We call it brain damage, but it actually increases the utilitarian ethical decision making of people. It means that people will act in the greater good, even if it goes against their own genetic fitness. And if somebody actually did behave ethically rather than morally in that situation, what do you think the headlines would read the next day? Would they read, "Noble mother sacrifices own genetic fitness to save strangers," or would it be, "Monster mom leaves children to die in a fire"?
But that's also a function of how we disseminate information in the media ecosystem. But I completely agree with you. Yeah.
So having avoided your question as long as I possibly can, do we have an ethical obligation? I don't know. Honestly, I
Well, I
think
mean, not prescriptive, I mean, I didn't mean to say that you have to prescribe something, but the question is more, do you have to put something forward, such as sort of this modified trolley dilemma or trolley problem is like, who do I, kill? Do I kill less? Is that the better option if I only have two choices here? The trolley problem, people can look that up, what that means. But I guess the question is, do you guys as sci-fi writers in this particular genre have to sort of weave that in? I mean, I think you certainly do from what I read of yours.
I
So
don't think you have to weed it in. I think the nature of the genre, though, says that kind of sentiment is going to emerge naturally,
yeah,
almost inevitably from. I mean, science fiction. Probably the most satisfying definition of science fiction I have heard is that science fiction is that brand of literature which explicitly deals with the social impact of technological change.
mm-hmm.
And technology and technological change and the fallout of technological change is front and center to pretty much everything that's kicking us in the balls these days. And so if you're actually, unless you're writing just, escapist fluff, which is fine, but if you actually take that definition of science fiction seriously and say we are going to explore the impact of technological change, I don't see how you can't investigate socially relevant issues that are of paramount importance these days.
Yeah.
Not because you've set out to be a missionary, but because that's just the nature of the genre. The real question is, does anybody listen to us? And I don't really think they do.
That I think I agree with you, but I also think that maybe the sci-fi genre attracts people who want to find this this outlet. Maybe like the horror genre too. I mean, we can talk about horror as well, where everything is possible, complete escapism and just very very deep exploration of social issues. I want to get to the work because the problem is now, Peter, because of the incredible unmitigated success of this Second Life Book Club operation. I now have to read on a schedule, and I'm constantly reading, so the fun is over. So I only had time to read one of your books, which is in German. I read it in German. I'm bringing it up here. It's floating here. In German, it's called Blindflug, and in English, it's called Blindside. You find it here on the table. If you click on it, you'll get to Peter's website, rifters.com. And yeah, Blindside is quite amazing, and you tackle so much stuff in there. Um, it's a first contact type novel. The story takes place in 2082 when some 60,000 unknown objects enter Earth's atmosphere at the same time, and then they get destroyed through the atmosphere, leaving no trace. People think that's some sort of gigantic photo has been taken um, by aliens, sort of a gigantic surveillance operation by an alien force, and then a manned probe gets sent out into space years later to find the origin of a radio signal. They discover an object that starts speaking to them in sort of colloquial English, which is awesome. This alien object just talks to them like, "Hey, it was," I'm paraphrasing, "What's up, guys?" Um, the human crew, all of them are technologically enhanced. They include a vampire. Um, that vampire race has been resurrected, genetically re-engineered. They react to this alien communication. They ignore some warnings. They do some despicable things, and as humans often do, and then it goes from there. Is that a fair summary?
Um, yeah. Um,
Thank you.
I would
This,
say,
this is all I want here on the book club. I want approval from the teacher. Like, yes, Draxtor, you can now sit down. You get an A+ in summary. And this is all about.
I'm just a little concerned that people might think that that Rorschach continues to talk to everybody in conventional North American slang throughout the course of the book. It's actually a very short part of the book, and then it shuts up in very rapid, very short order, and things go seriously south from that point.
And Rorschach, by the way, that's what we're talking about. Rorschach is that alien artifact. We don't know what it is. We're not going to spoil it, but absolutely, there's a short interaction with the first contact. But I just thought that was very. I mean, there's tons of unique stuff in this novel, but that was one that I've just found really hilarious. Yeah, and
well, I mean, I can take credit for a few ideas in the book, but not most of them. Most of them I just rip off from other people and other research. And that particular scene that you're talking about is just a riff on Searle's Chinese room, which was an argument.
My next question. What is the Chinese room? So this is a concept that is fascinating. What is the Chinese room?
Well, you're all familiar with Alan Turing and his imitation game and the phrase the Turing Test, which is basically using the technology of Turing's time. If you're typing through a teletype to something and it's writing back to you and you're having a conversation in the language of your choice, and you cannot tell whether it is a machine or not, then it has passed the Turing test. And his basic argument is, if it walks like a duck, squawks like a duck, farts like a duck, might as well call it a duck. And Searle's response to this is, no, you can easily imagine a scenario in which a machine can speak perfect conversational in English to you, or conversational Chinese in this case, and still have absolutely no idea what it's saying. It is not intelligent. Basically, he was shitting on the Turing test.
So and the Turing test, real quick, one added aspect, the Turing test also is I believe still used in determining if an AI is we're getting ahead in developing AI that is actually useful.
Yeah, there's a contest, isn't there? There's an annual contest where the winner is the one whose AI has managed to pass the Turing test for the greatest period of time. But Searle's response was, okay, imagine a room in which there is a person who speaks English but not Chinese. And there in the room with him is an enormous database. Forget the technology of it, just a massive database of rules. And in through a slot comes these scratches, which are in Chinese, but the guy does not speak Chinese. What he does have, though, is this database that tells him, okay, when you see this particular squiggle, you respond that way. When you see these two particular squiggles in concert, you respond a different way. And so following these purely deterministic flowcharty rules, you come up with a response. The guy in the room comes up with a response, prints out that response, and sends it out through the slot. To any Chinese speaker on the other side of that box, on the outside of that box, they're feeding in statements in Chinese, and they're getting perfectly coherent, rational, intelligent responses out the other end. That box has therefore passed the Turing test, and yet the person following the flowchart has absolutely no idea what information he is communicating or what he is saying. There's no semantic comprehension of what he's doing. And Searle did this to basically shut down the Turing test, because Searle wants to tell us that consciousness is basically a quantum phenomenon. That's a whole different ball of wax. And people have criticized Searle's thing by saying, yeah, of course, the guy in the room doesn't understand Chinese any more than a single neuron in your brain understands English when it talks. What you've got to look at is the entire system. And so there's an interpretation of that test, which supposedly turns it on its head, that says although the one guy in the middle of the system doesn't understand the language, the entire system, the room, the slot, the massive database, and the guy taken together as a whole do understand Chinese. And it bounces back and forth because, philosophers really, really need something to argue about in these
Well, I
final
know a
days.
lot of I know people that I went to college with who seemed to me they were living Chinese rooms in a way. I mean,
Yeah.
actually, Arthur says in the chat here, a lot of humans don't pass the Turing test.
Well, that is actually something that has come out in the literature recently, which is both scary and vindicating. And that is the efforts of social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter and so on to filter out the pernicious chatbots that presumably are compromising the very nature of our democracy, as though functioning democracy is something we even have. These are doomed to fail because, as that person in the comments said, perhaps sarcastically, but literally, human beings most of the time cognitively operate on the level of a chatbot. There have been studies that basically show that when you talk about small talk, when you talk about, we really hate the politician on the other side, or looks like it's nice weather, doesn't it?
Exactly.
Or when we are writing essays for our English professor, and we know what kind of key phrases that English professor keeps using all the time, so we just throw those in like we're stapling together a bunch of fortune cookies. All of these things are sort of second order non-conscious behaviors.
Absolutely.
So very much of a great deal of our conversation is bot-like. And there's a paper out, I forget the author, but the title is something along the lines of human beings are not intelligent unless concentrating.
I couldn't agree more. Isn't that though? I mean, I don't know. The origin to me lies also in the way we are conditioned early on. I mean, I see it with my son, the way he has to write these essays, as you mentioned. I mean, I could see a bot writing his essay. I mean, he becomes a bot when he has to write these essays because he knows exactly how he has to deliver them in order to get the satisfactory grades. And years ago, I remember there was a researcher from a university in Israel here in Second Life, and he predicted, that was 12 years ago when I met him on a project here in Second Life. He said, within a few years, we will basically have NPR style reportages that can be automatically generated. I don't know if we're not quite there yet, but we know that local news is being outsourced. Actually, to human beings, not machines yet. But anyway.
Well, to some extent, it's happening in the stock market. You have these high frequency trading algos that actually comb through media reports, key on specific phrases, actually analyze them in terms of emotional content, and generate their own content in response to try to psych out other investors, which at this point are like 8 or 9% other bots anyway. So
you mean to make them afraid to make a choice or push them towards another choice, buy or sell?
Yeah, to influence a particular choice.
Right.
I mean, these things are still constrained because they have been programmed with a particular goal in mind. What I want to see is what happens when you basically say, okay, all bets are off. We're not trying to scam anybody's credit card information. We're not trying to tilt the stock market. What we want to do is just let these things reproduce. Give them a few random number generators to serve as genes in terms of their code. Let them out there. Let them replicate so that the only prime directive they have is Darwinian replication. Then I think you would have literally an electronic life form that meets all the Darwinian criteria for something that is alive. It would be Dawkins' definition of life was information shaped by natural selection. Doesn't have to be carbon-based, doesn't even have to be solid. And I think the only reason that hasn't happened yet, and that the entire internet hasn't seized up with weeds and predators choking the wires, is because the people who are writing the pernicious code basically don't want their malware to get out of hand. They still want your credit card info. But technically, I don't see any reason why we couldn't create a digital life form right now. People have been doing stuff like that in lab scenarios for decades.
Mm-hmm. If you're just tuning in and you are wondering what's going on here, this is an actual human being. And how's the weather in Canada? No, but I'm talking with Peter Watts, an amazing author, and to my shame, I admit I only read Blindside, and I hope that we can read an excerpt from it. Please have your questions ready. I'm looking at the chat as well. In Blindside, you touch on these things. What I found most striking is that um, in the contact with this alien life form, humans get. I'm changing a little bit here the trajectory of the conversation. We could go a million different ways, but I'm also aware that Linden Lab will kick us out of the book club in 60 minutes, and we haven't even dropped any F-bomb yet. Um, what happens with this first contact here is exactly this type of discussion about what life is. Is this alien life form that the folks in the probe encounter in Blindside, are they alive? Are they conscious? Um, ho- w- I guess the question is, to me, what I feel is, it's not surprising that the humans do something pretty bad. They act aggressively, and I guess the reason is that the consensus is that this alien life form, because their technology is so advanced, that they must be aggressive. So this is, I think, to me, a core point in your book, where we could discuss this for hours. But this is an important theme for you, is it not? That is technological superiority automatically tied to the need to be aggressive, or is that what we as human beings are sort of raised to believe, or is that also the lizard brain acting out here?
I mean, it's just an idea I threw out there. I think it's open to debate. I don't think most of us are raised to believe that. I think most of us are raised to believe that we were built in the image of the angels, and that some invisible sky fairy is going to send us to Space Disneyland when we die. I don't think most people are taught that we have those kind of brutish cores. And if we did, civilization has certainly tamed them.
I just want to interject real
The
quick,
idea,
because I'm reading a book called Fortress America by a historian, and it's very interesting. It's about the Cold War, and she stipulates the fear that is still sort of inherent in that particular generation that grew up under the Cold War, the fear of communism and the fear of the Soviet Union actually using nuclear weapons. One interesting aspect was, because the Americans used nuclear weapons and they perceived themselves as the good guys, they, of course, uh, that she stipulates that this is one of the reasons why the fear of the Soviet Union was so amplified, because everybody knew, hey, we're the good guys and we use nuclear energy. These guys are the bad guys, so of course they're going to use it.
what you're talking about is, I mean, the obvious half-century-old term is arms race.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, my whole idea of technology implies belligerence is something that I got from a similar concept, the idea that sex in life, sex through, across the biosphere, evolved as part of an arms race against parasites. And that's kind of what I put, that's kind of where I got my technology implies belligerence, because the environment is going to throw a bunch of stuff at you. And if it gets cold, you could evolve to grow fur, or you could increase your metabolic rate. If it gets hot, you can lose the fur. If the pond dries out, those members of your fish fellows that happen to have a perforated swim bladder, so you can kind of gulp air and survive for a little while, those will survive and they will hang on. There's this evolutionary process against random or linear, dead environment changes that you either adapt to, in which case evolution stops, or they kill you, in which case also evolution stops. But there's another kind of arms race evolution in which that doesn't happen, and that is when the variable that is impacting you can change its own strategy. That you come up with an adaptation and the other thing comes up with a counter adaptation. The weather does not do that. Asteroids do not do that. The only other thing that does that is life. And if you accept the premise that technology itself is a, hang on a second, what a stupid, no, I don't want to. If you accept, sorry, my phone went off for some reason. If you accept the premise that technology itself is a rebellion against the way things are, that technology by its very nature exists to force the universe into unnatural shapes, that's what tools do, then technology reflects another form of this evolution. And so the impression that I just took that basic evolutionary riff that you get an evolutionary arms race, that things that counteract what you do, thus forcing you to achieve an ever higher plane of adaptation, and they do the same thing. You get this escalating arms race. The only things that does that is when both players are alive. And likewise with technology. At some point, technology hits some complacent asymptote. We are comfy in our lives. We've developed functional immortality or whatever, and it flattens out. It plateaus. If technology continues to increase, that implies that there is something else out there coming up with increasingly sophisticated technology that you have to constantly fight against. So the conclusion from that is that ultimately, when you have something that's capable of interstellar travel, it will have come from some kind of a hellhole world where the asymptote never arrived, and that we are now dealing with things who have never forgotten that life and tools and technology itself is a struggle against other life. And so when we run into these things, they're not going to be the peaceful Pillsbury Doughboy that climbed out of the flying chandelier at the end of Close Encounters of the Third Kind. They're going to be mean. And it was a thought experiment. I'm not sure that many people who are students of history, who know far more about history than I do, would probably call BS on it.
Well, that's a similar thing. It's a similar thing that Xi Jingliu picks up in the Dark Forest. I mean, I'm completely obsessed with the three-body problem, and the Dark Forest, I think, is even better than the three-body problem. So
yeah,
I mean, the way you described it, and isn't it in Blindside? I mean, they do have, because this is what I was going to ask you. The world building is very precise, but then it also leaves tons open to the imagination. I find that balance really unique in your voice. That really impressed me. You have very specific things in terms of societal organization and certain technology, but then you leave a lot of stuff open. I'm not sure. In this world in Blindside, there is no people don't have sex anymore. They don't have to, right? And they kind of don't like it either.
Well, they do have sex, but it's considered a kink.
Mm-hmm.
And when you've got technology that's sufficient to maximize your teledildonics potential, when you can in fact just stick an electrode or use compressed ultrasound to stimulate your pleasure centers, when you can have sex in VR with something that does not have pores or bad breath or make any demands on you, I can see regular two-body, sweaty, body-slapping sex. I can see it kind of fading into the background. I mean, we're seeing something similar to that already when people have been so reprogrammed by porn that they are increasingly dissatisfied with their real world partners because they are holding them to an impossible standard.
Yeah.
This is just, again, it's not particularly imaginative or insightful on my part. I'm just looking at a contemporary trend and drawing an "if this goes on" line up ahead a few decades.
but it plays into how people in your book, I mean, the protagonists, how they react, how they are all kind of emotionally stunted in their own way. I mean, each one of them, I think. I mean, that's how I kind of read it.
Well, you got to remember these characters are not. I mean, they're not gonna randomly grab a bunch of people off the street and send them off to make first contact, right? These people have been twisted, and retrofitted, and engineered up the wazoo. So they're not what you would call typical people. But then again, typical people have already sort of had their brains plugged into heaven anyway, because there's no point in having them around anymore.
Heaven is the virtual world in the book where you can, I don't know if you have access, if it's expensive to get in there. The main protagonist's mother, she uploads herself into that virtual world called Heaven. Is that optional in the story, or is that something desirable?
It's something you do when you realize that any job you have in the society is a make work job. Mm-hmm. That it's the augmented people, it's the transhuman people, it's the AIs that are actually doing all the worthwhile stuff. And any job they're going to give to a baseline human is essentially the equivalent of putting them into a petting zoo and telling them to play with some blocks. At that point, some people are, cool with that. I mean, hell, how many people today the ceiling is already crashing in, and half the population is still just sitting on the couch snarfing pork rinds and watching game shows.
I just made 3 blocks here in Second Life because everything starts with a cube. See? We're doing it already.
Okay, yeah, there you go. Don't cask of Amontillado me here. So
yeah.
Sure. Where was I going before your cube so rudely? Geez. Da-da-da.
Well, that in a world where it's
where right, heaven.
Yeah.
But in any case, it's self-sustaining because the conceit of heaven is that you basically pay your own rent because most of your brain processes things subconsciously. So you're essentially used as a node in a processing network, and you can have your own little virtual world, as Siri's mother did, and you can create your own friends and you can create your own environment. But that just takes a very, very small amount of brain power. The rest of your brain has been hijacked into this massive organic neural net, and it's being used for various transhuman and AI-based purposes. And your retirement into heaven is essentially the price the system is paying you for the use of the rest of your brain.
This is incredible. This is I don't know if you know this, but people in the audience probably do. Philip Rosedale, the founder of Linden Lab, the co-creator of Second Life, he started a venture with a distributed network, high fidelity, a virtual world, where the worlds are created on distributed machines. And of course, I mean, we're far away of uploading our brains into it, but conceptually, that was sort of your entry point. If you wanted to do it, was your machine that created the world where you were sort of that you inhabited, and your friends, and by connecting these machines, it created the worlds together.
Cool.
Yeah. I'm looking at the time here because this is part of my job, unfortunately. And it really sucks. I would like to have this show for at least 4 hours. Do you want to read something from Blindside? Also want to mention, folks, see on the table here all these other books that Peter wrote. His first is Starfish. You find a bunch of different covers of Blindside, and you find this book here, The Freeze Frame Revolution, which I ordered. And that's the next one I will read, but I haven't read it. And you also find here in the back here, Peter Watts is an angry sentient tumor. Sentient, sorry. What does that mean? What kind of book is that?
It's just a collection of essays that I've done for various outlets. I had a monthly column in a Polish magazine. I've done online articles. I've got a lot of blog posts in there. It's just Freeze Frame Revolution did really well. So so the publisher sort of came back to me and said, "You've got to do something else. How about a collection of your blog posts?" And I thought, but I've got a blog, right? People can just go to the blog. They don't have to pay anything. No problem. We'll throw in some other stuff. So that's what happened. The quote itself is, I think Annalee Newitz may have reviewed one of my collections of short stories by saying that my stories got into your brain like an angry sentient tumor and wouldn't leave. So
that's brilliant. That's where that comes from.
So that's where they got the title from.
That's
so you
awesome.
want me to read?
Yeah, if you want to read from Blindside or from the Freeze Frame Revolution, I have Blindside up here on the stand in front of you. If you can walk up to it. That's what we do here. I don't know if you can walk. I mean, in your strange embodiment, I have no idea. This is what I wanted to ask you too. What this embodiment is all about.
It was cheap. And it was vaguely cephalopoid. So stand up. Yes. How do I? Here I am.
Yeah.
How do I pick up one of these things? There's.
Don't pick them up. Just walk forward. There is a stand, and there's a book on the stand.
Walk forward. Oh.
You see? Look right here at the edge of the stage. I can actually bring. There you go. Since you're so tall, I can also make it a little bigger for you. Here we go. This should do it. Here we go.
Okay. All right.
Now what are we gonna hear?
Well, you've already given the basic starting premise. People with any kind of passing, interest probably know that Blindside is a book that, as the blog, as the bio note says, examines the functional utility of consciousness in the constraints of a first contact novel with space vampires. So I'm not going to go into any of that stuff because it would probably be boring. But I'm going to read you a bit of basically backstory from the point of view of the protagonist. Virtually all of this story takes place in space, but every now and then he flashes back to his life on Earth. So this is going to be the man has gift, but he is, shall we say, not entirely apt in the whole social skills department.
So he's a synthesist, and it's not that he's telepathic, but he has this uncanny ability through this brain operation as a child to read people and to understand deeply what they want to say.
He's basically a human room, a human Chinese room. He can do all sorts of very sophisticated analysis, but he doesn't really know how to internalize it. So I guess we will start on page 291. And just because I want to maintain some shred of academic credibility, the disease I mentioned here, ectopic fibrodysplasia, that's a real disease. It hasn't been weaponized to the extent that I've described here, but it's real and the symptoms are real. So keep that in mind.
Can I also, before you start reading, I want to say that we have in the audience Kelly Robson, who I believe is a friend and as well as an antagonist of yours and your ideas. And maybe Kelly wants to come up on stage to, after this reading, she has some questions for you, I understand.
Not an antagonist, but
that remains to be seen.
No.
Okay, and while you're reading it, in the background, we will have a loop of a fan-made trailer. Okay, because people need visual stimulation while they're being read to.
Good enough.
They cannot single task, Peter, I'm sorry to say.
Take it away.
So in the background, we have this trailer, which is a fan-made movie that is coming. I don't know when. We'll talk about it.
It's actually like just a few scenes there from that have been released or approved for public release. But anyway, hang on, what is it? No, I'm looking at that.
I've seen the longer version, and it's incredible what these guys did, and I hope that they get this movie done. But now we're going to hear from a little flashback of the main character, Siri Keaton, who is this synthesist, a human Chinese.
And he's the point of view character for
for the entire story, which actually surprised me because I thought, why didn't you actually hop between these different people? Because there's another protagonist with multiple personality, not disorder. She has segmented different personalities in her brain. Then there's the vampire. Then there is a transhuman guy who can hear and feel and taste data floating around him. And I was wondering, why didn't you? I mean, this would have been sort of isn't that the standard approach to jump between these viewpoints in this type
Yeah,
of novel?
if you have more imagination than me, I suppose.
No, I think but what you did is actually
honestly,
very imaginative.
I thought the book was way too talky as it is, so I thought I'd stick with more. Anyway,
Okay,
here we go.
go.
He was wrong on both counts. And at least Spindell had died knowing that Michelle cared for him. Chelsea died thinking I just didn't give a shit. It had been 2 years or more, and while we still interfaced occasionally, we hadn't met in the flesh since the day she'd left. She came at me from right out of the yurt, sent an urgent voice message to my inlays. Cygnus, please call now. It's important. It was the first time since I'd known her that she'd ever blanked the optics. I knew it was important. I knew it was bad, even without picture. I knew because there was no picture, and I could tell it was worse than bad from the harmonics in her voice. I could tell it was lethal. I found out afterward she'd gotten caught in the crossfire. The realists had sewn a fibrodysplasia variant outside the Boston catacombs, an easy tweak, a single-point retrovirus, whose results served both as an act of terrorism and an ironic commentary on the frozen paralysis of Heaven's occupants. It rewrote a regulatory gene controlling ossification on chromosome 4, rigged a metabolic bypass at 3 loci on 17. Chelsea started growing a new skeleton. Her joints were calcifying within 15 hours of exposure, her ligaments and tendons within 20. By then they were starving her at the cellular level, trying to slow the bug by depriving it of metabolites, but they could only buy time and not much of it. 23 hours in, her striated muscles were turning to stone. I didn't find this out immediately because I didn't call her back. I didn't need to know the details. I could tell from her voice that she was dying. Obviously, she wanted to say goodbye. I couldn't talk to her until I knew how to do that. I spent hours scouring the noosphere looking for precedents. There's no shortage of ways to die. I found millions of case records dealing with the etiquette. Last words, last vows, instruction manuals for the soon-to-be-bereaved, palliative neuropharm, extended and expository death scenes in popular fiction. I went through it all, assigned a dozen frontline filters to separate heat from light. By the time she called again, the news was out. Acute golem outbreak, lancing like a white-hot needle through the heart of Boston. Containment measures holding, heaven secure. Modest casualties expected. Names of victims withheld, pending notification of kin. I still didn't know the principles, the rules. All I had were examples. Last wills and testaments, the negotiation of jumpers with their would-be rescuers, diaries recovered from imploded submarines or lunar crash sites, recorded memoirs and deathbed confessions rattling into flatline, black box transcripts of doomed spaceships and falling beanstalks, ending in fire and static. All of it relevant, none of it useful, none of it her. She called again. And still the optics were blank. And still I didn't answer. But the last time she called, she didn't spare me the view. They'd made her as comfortable as possible. The gel pad conformed to every twisted limb, every erupting spur of bone. They would not have left her in any pain. Her neck had torqued down and to the side as if petrified, left her staring at the twisted claw that had once been her right hand. Her knuckles were the size of walnuts. Plates and ribbons of ectopic bone distended the skin of her arms and shoulders, buried her ribs in a fibrous mat of calcified flesh. Movement was its own worst enemy. Golem punished even the slightest twitch, provoked the growth of fresh bone along any joints and surfaces conspiring to motion. Each hinge and socket had its own non-renewable ration of flexibility, carved in stone. Every movement depleted that account. The body seized incrementally. By the time she let me look at her, Chelsea had almost exhausted her degrees of freedom. Sig, she slurred. No, you're there. Her jaw was locked half open. Her tongue must have stiffened with every word. She did not look at the camera. She could not look at the camera. Guess I know why you're not answering. I'll try not to take it personally. 10,000 deathbed goodbyes arrayed around me, a million more within reach. What was I supposed to do? Pick one at random? Stitch them into some kind of composite? All these words had been for other people. Grafting them onto Chelsea would reduce them to cliches, to trite platitudes, to insults. I want to say, don't feel bad. I know it's not your fault, I guess. You'd pick up if you could. And say what? What do you say to someone who's dying and fast forward before your eyes? Although the essentials of this farewell are accurate, details from several deaths have been combined for dramatic purposes. Please just talk to me, Sig. More than anything, I wanted to. Siri, I'd spent all this time trying to figure how. Forget it, she said, and disconnected. I whispered something into the dead air. I don't even remember what. I really wanted to talk to her. I just couldn't find an algorithm that fit. So that was kind of a bit of a downer. I have, happier space opera stuff to read later if,
Peter, I thank you so much for choosing this excerpt. Let's give a round of applause. I don't know if people have a clapping here, because this is really, really powerful. And the relationship of Siri with Chelsea is told in these flashbacks, and he has problems opening up to her, and she is embracing him, but then at some point they break up because he is so, I don't know what you call him, not necessarily emotionally stunted. But here Go Speed was saying in the chat that when she was saying goodbye to, when her father was dying, how hard that was, and she didn't know what to say. And I have similar experiences with close people that left.
Yeah.
So thank you. This was a powerful excerpt. And yes, there is cheerful other stuff too in the book.
Did somebody just fart?
No, I took a picture. Maybe that makes a fart noise. I don't know. But that's at the core of the, also, I mean, juxtaposing this in the way they then also behave with the aliens. I think that makes this narrative so powerful, and really makes you, again, as a reader. I'm just a reader. I'm not an academic or a sci-fi expert by any means, or any expert for that matter. But what connected with me with this book particularly is because the way you structure it and throw this in, and then you see how they interact with the aliens. It's a lot of food for thought.
Well,
if you want to sit back down, and if Kelly wants to come on stage, Kelly has to go in 5 minutes. Oh my God, Kelly, do you have a question for? Kelly Robson is a fellow Canadian sci-fi author. She was on the show twice, actually. If Kelly wants to come on stage, you just have to hop on or click on the sofa, and then you're up there. She's
Sofa
walking up.
time. Hey, that was, wow, quite. I have never heard you read that one before, Peter. That's just, it's so powerful.
I'm glad you liked it.
Yeah, no, and you blew us all away. Away. And this is one of the reasons why, you are one of my favorite writers, is you do things that I don't know how to do. And those are the writers that I love the best, where I read something of theirs and I'm like, holy shit, I don't know how you pulled that off. It was just so good.
I would just like to point out that, for the audience here, that Kelly and her wife, although I guess she wasn't a wife back then, kind of saved my life when I was going through a really rough spot in my own life. So I am appreciative of Kelly both as a writer and as a fan, but she's also a really awesome person when it comes to just sort of being there when your life is a train wreck.
Well,
awesome.
It was our privilege. So questions.
I know I put you on the spot, Kelly. Sit down on the sofa and ask him a question. Here, I'm gonna give you one. Do writers read or just watch TV for relaxation?
We read and we play video games, don't we, Peter?
Yeah, sometimes you do both of them at the same time.
Are you still reading dedicating every Wednesday to reading?
No, I've still got Lexus's Game Changer is still sitting on the stack. She's come right after. I'm almost finished Carl's book.
Carl Schrader, the new one. Wait a minute. Are you saying you're dedicating Wednesday? You used to dedicate an entire day to just reading, meaning off the grid, digitally speaking, or what? How?
There was a time. Concept. Well, yeah, there was a time when I realized that I was putting off reading the stuff I wanted to read because it didn't seem like work. So I would read these incredibly long, boring, dry physics papers that I did not understand, but I figured I had to keep up with the literature, and as a result, I literally have 2 giant bookcases full of books that I have bought and want to read and just never got around to. So I was feeling particularly inspired, back in the before time when Kelly and I could still meet face to face. And I did tell her that this is at this point I'm going to take 1 day a week and I'm going to devote it to reading stuff I want to read, because that's part of my job, right? I am supposed to know what my colleagues and my competitors and my bitter enemies are doing.
Yeah, exactly.
And it didn't work. It worked for about 2 weeks, and then it was then there was a deadline, and then there was travel, and then I came back, and so I'm doing it now. And in fact, I've got this little thing where right now I've put it down to, for 2 half-hour segments a day, I will read.
Good.
And that's how I've gotten through Carl's and the Mies. One of my step-pones is hammering me with this book on indigenous politics that I should really read. So I don't know if I'm going to try and sneak in Lexus's Game Changer.
Game Changer is good. It flops, so you'll get through it quick.
Okay, that's what I'll do. But yeah, I do. I mean, I don't read as much as I should. I mean, really, it's been. I am ashamed of how little I've been reading lately. In high school, I would go through five novels in 2 weeks, and now that I'm writing for, even during my university career, I would read science fiction. I would read non-science. I would just read a lot. And now that I'm an actual writer, I hardly read anything, and it's something I've really got to kick myself in the ass and do, because I was raised by Baptists, right? If you enjoy doing something, you're supposed to stop. I think
Peter, I was raised by Germans. We were raised the same way. We were raised, if it feels good, it's what are you doing for work? Well, I'm a musician. Does it feel good? Yeah, mostly. Okay, it's not work.
Yeah, but at least you Germans have got some really interesting sexual kinks, right? Us Canadians, baby pouring maple syrup on somebody's nipples. That's about as far as it gets.
Oh, now we're banned from YouTube.
Sex in a canoe.
Really quickly, I have been informed by our wonderful producers that we're approaching the top of the hour, so we'll get 5 minutes extra, folks, and then we're going to head outside for the post game, which will hang out for another 30 minutes, but off the stream, just for the in-world audience. And we have a wonderful game area outside that was put together by Arduin. Arduin is awesome, and he also put some space flying saucers out there where we can fly around. So
cool.
That sounds fantastic.
This is the book club. Peter Watts on stage, and Kelly Robson. I suppose the reading is I mean, it's a balance. I read in the morning and I read in the evening. I get up early when it's quiet and then I read. It's a very sort of regimented day structure that I think is really important.
And reading
It's a
is your
meditative
job as
task.
well. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm reading Kate Elliott's Unconquerable Sun, which just came out yesterday. It's a space opera. And I'm not sure if I'll stick with it or not because she's not doing anything I can't do
So
yet.
you read. I
Yeah.
see. That's interesting. So this is how I approach music. So approach music the same way, where I need to see like where's the train headed, what are people doing, and then I can analyze it quickly, and then I shut it off, and then I go to something that I really enjoy. So that's how
Mm.
you do it, huh, Kelly? You're checking in on the competitors, and you go like, yeah, you're, and then you conclude like,
Well, you've got to try a book to see if it works for you, right? But yeah, so far Kate can't match up to Peter Watts. So,
uh-huh.
but Peter,
She probably makes more royalties than I do.
it's possible, but she probably travels in the U.S. and promotes her books there.
Without a
well,
mask.
can I
Without a
just
mask. Sorry, go ahead.
can I just jump in here and point to that tactical animation going on behind you there?
Mm-hmm.
Just for the benefit of the audience, that is astronomically accurate. The guys that made this animation accessed the IAU Stellar Database, and they plotted thousands of solar system objects, like from pebbles right up to comets to gas giants. They cycled them ahead to 2082 when the game begins, and they actually ran them in their respective and predicted locations. So everything except the trajectory of the spaceships there is actually astronomically accurate. I'm just absolutely blown away by that.
This is
Where is
absolutely.
the animation?
Sorry?
Where is the animation?
Yeah, give us a little context on who these guys are because we didn't talk about it, and that is just absolutely mind-blowing. I mean, this is just a 2-minute excerpt of various scenes strung together from, I understand, a fan-made movie project of Blindside. I don't know what stage it is in, but they have a very, very hidden. You showed it to me. We can't share it, but a 10-minute. Sorry, what is it? 8-minute. Excerpt, which
4
is just
minutes or something? I don't know.
it's
Yeah,
it's
it's pretty
insane.
amazing.
Yeah. So
But
who
yeah,
are
no,
these guys?
these guys are, as far as I know, a bunch of Russian expats. I think some of them are still. The only guy I have direct contact with is a dude called Daniil. His last name begins with K. It has about 8,000 syllables and 2 vowels. And I've never met the man in person, but I've been corresponding with him for years, and he's an awesome guy. And he's basically running this team. They're obviously a bunch of FX professionals spread all over the place. I think one of them is in Ukraine. I think a couple of them are in LA. One of them is in New York. And they just wanted to do this, as they basically just wanted to set up a tribute fan site.
Mm-hmm.
And they've done some wonderful posters and stuff and artwork too. And the cool thing is they basically ran their ideas past me. So what you're looking at here is something that's very close, from the design of the spaceships down to the suits to the look of the actual characters.
Mm-hmm.
None of which you actually get to see in this truncated version, but
well, the characters in the sense that
this is very close to what was going through my mind when I was writing the book. These are the images that were going through my mind.
That is actually amazing because this does fascinate me. I always ask that question: how do you feel if a movie was made from your book? And then I always say, as a reader, I actually don't like it because it destroys my imagination in my head. But it's fascinating that you say you seem like the characters that they use in this fan-made movie, that this is how you envisioned those characters too, kind of.
Yeah, and when I haven't, their vision has been better.
Yeah. It's really remarkable. I mean, I'm gonna try to contact them. Maybe we can meet all in Second Life and we'll talk about it. You know, this might be a nice subject of discussion where we discuss how they actually, what kind of work is involved in this movie. I mean, this is the best sort of not. I mean, these are professionals, but let's say with a project that I've seen that is not studio backed, it's really stunning.
The website itself is blindsite.space. and it's got a bunch of stuff in it. It's still obviously a work in progress, but it's been out there for a few years. Blindside.space, once again, for those of you in the audience who want to check it out, these guys are amazing.
Great.
So I'm gonna wrap the streaming show now with saying goodbye to everybody on our streaming audience on Facebook, YouTube, and such, and we'll go to the informal elitist portion of the program that involves only us here in World. So if you wanna come, then next time you come early, come in into SL and join us. This has been absolutely fascinating. Peter, thank you so much for coming. Peter Watts is the author of many, many books. They're all here on the table. They're all free to, some of them are free to read on your website. Maybe we can talk
Including
about this.
Blindside.
Yeah, I was wondering in the post game we can touch on this because it's fascinating how you retain the rights. I went through something similar with music for a film that was for public television in Germany, and I can tell you horror stories about retaining the rights to my own stuff. Every artist probably can.
Yeah.
But you have it on your website, and people can check it out. And people can, of course, buy it in different formats. And thank you to my team. Thank you to Strawberry, to Marianne, to Patch, Brett, Kralos, AJ, Slink, and Arduin today. Thank you for coming, sticking around. We're ending the stream. We're doing some Q&A. The reading list is at bookshop.org/shop/Draxtor Reads. Next week, we have a different time. We have a panel of amazing authors from Australia. So this will be at 5 o'clock Second Life time, which is 2 a.m. my local time. So you will see how I, as a brilliant moderator, you can kick me out of bed and I can moderate a program. No, well maybe I can. You have to stop by. This is a panel of Australian authors, very very different backgrounds. Look at the calendar, please, and check your local listings. Thanks again to my team. See you all next Wednesday, 5 o'clock, right here at the Second Life Book Club.
Thank you guys so much for showing up. And thanks for hosting us, Drax.
This was so much fun. Thank you.